In the summer of 1995, two brothers, Ethan and Liam, ventured into the vast, untamed wilderness of Mount Cinder National Park and were never seen again. For decades, their disappearance remained one of the park's most enduring mysteries, until a dedicated park ranger stumbled upon an object that could not be ignored, a clue belonging to one of the brothers. What truly happened in the rugged heart of that mountain? Watch this video to the end to unravel this incredible story. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping investigations. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching this video from? The summer of 1995 had settled over the Pacific Northwest with a particular warmth, bathing Mount Cinder National Park in a golden haze. This was a place of breathtaking beauty and unforgiving wilderness, where ancient redwood trees towered towards the sky and deep ravines carved their way through the rugged terrain. For the Miller brothers, however, the allure of the wild was an irresistible call. Ethan and Liam Miller, both 21 years old, were inseparable, bound by a shared love for nature and a reputation in their small, mountain-adjacent town for their adventurous spirit. They had grown up exploring every trail, mastering every climb, challenging every swift river. Their father, a retired park ranger, had taught them from a young age to respect the wilderness, to read its signs, to survive its harsh realities. The mountain gives life, but it also takes it, he would often tell them. Never turn your back on it. Never underestimate its power. That morning, on August 15th, the brothers were making their final preparations for an ambitious multi-day hike. Their destination was a sector of Mount Cinder known as the Whispering Peaks, an area so remote and challenging that even seasoned hikers rarely attempted it. It was rumored to hold untouched beauty and hidden wonders, a perfect challenge for their adventurous souls. Ethan, with his steady leadership, and Liam, with his sharp wit and meticulous planning, made a formidable team. Their mother, Sarah, watched them from the porch of their cabin, a familiar knot of worry tightening in her stomach. "Are you sure you want to go so deep, boys?" she asked, her voice tinged with the apprehension that only a mother can feel. Ethan, tall and lean with a reassuring smile, adjusted his worn hiking pack. "Mom, we've hiked this park hundreds of times. We'll be fine." Liam, equally fit, with his fair hair almost matching Ethan's, carefully secured his vintage camera, a cherished gift from Sarah on his high school graduation, into a waterproof pouch. "Besides," Liam added, "Ethan thinks there's an old, forgotten fire watch tower out there that no one's visited in decades. Could be an amazing view." Sarah sighed, knowing it was futile to argue. From the time they were small boys, if one of the twins set his mind to something, the other followed without hesitation. They seemed to share not just a face, but an adventurous spirit, a singular ambition divided between two bodies. "Then take the satellite phone," she insisted, handing them the rugged device her husband used for emergency communications, "and promise you'll check in every evening." The brothers embraced their mother, promising to return with stories she wouldn't believe. Then, with their packs heavy on their shoulders, they set off into the deep green embrace of Mount Cinder, leaving behind a faint trail of dust. It was the last time Sarah would see her sons. The morning sun, still low in the eastern sky, cast long, cool shadows as Ethan and Liam stepped onto the seldom-used trail leading into the Whispering Peaks. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the town below. Their heavy packs, filled with supplies for 3 days, felt surprisingly light against their shoulders, buoyed by the excitement of venturing into truly untamed territory. Ethan, always the leader, moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth and the towering ancient trees that soon enveloped them. Liam, a few paces behind, adjusted the strap of his camera bag, already anticipating the breathtaking shots he would capture. The trail quickly deteriorated, becoming little more than a faint deer path winding through a labyrinth of old-growth forest. Giant moss-covered boulders lay scattered like forgotten titans, and the ground was a treacherous carpet of fallen logs and tangled roots. This was the wilderness in its purest form, far from the manicured paths closer to the park entrance. The silence here was profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant cry of an eagle, or the gentle murmur of a hidden stream. It was a silence that could feel both comforting and unnerving, a reminder of their isolation. As they pushed deeper, the terrain grew increasingly challenging. They scaled steep inclines, clinging to exposed roots, and carefully navigated narrow ledges overlooking dizzying drops. Yet, the brothers moved with practiced ease, their years of experience in the wilderness evident in every sure-foot placement and every coordinated movement. They were in their element, sharing quick, knowing glances that spoke volumes more than words ever could. This was their sanctuary, their proving ground. However, as the second day drew to a close, a subtle shift in the environment began to register, though neither brother gave it much conscious thought. The air, usually so clean and invigorating, occasionally carried a faint, almost metallic tang, easily dismissed as a peculiar mineral scent from the rocks. The birdsong, which had been so abundant, seemed to grow sparser as they approached a particular, unusually uniform stand of trees, almost too perfect, too symmetrical, to be entirely natural. Ethan noted the unnerving stillness in that section of the forest, a profound absence of animal sounds, but attributed it to their remote location. Liam, trying to capture the ethereal light filtering through the canopy, found his camera struggling with an intermittent, inexplicable static, a minor electronic glitch he couldn't explain in such a pristine environment. They shrugged these small anomalies off, eager to reach their planned campsite. By late afternoon, they arrived at a secluded clearing, nestled beside a trickling spring. It was a picturesque spot, sheltered by towering evergreens, bathed in the soft, fading light of the setting sun. The ground was surprisingly flat and dry, perfect for pitching their tent. They quickly set up camp, built a small fire, and cooked their simple meal, the crackle of burning wood a comforting sound in the gathering dusk. Lying back, gazing at the first stars pricking through the darkening sky, they spoke of their discoveries and their plans for the next day. The vast, indifferent wilderness stretched around them, holding its breath, preparing to witness the events that would forever alter the lives of Ethan and Liam, events far more profound than any they could have imagined. The first day passed with only Sarah's usual manageable apprehension. She imagined her boys setting up camp, perhaps even checking in on the satellite phone that evening. But the phone remained silent. The second day stretched into the third, and still no call came. The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened into a hard, cold ball. This was not like them. Ethan was meticulous about safety, and Liam, despite his adventurous spirit, always respected their mother's wishes. By the fourth morning, her quiet worry had escalated into a frantic fear. She knew, with the chilling certainty only a mother possesses, that something was terribly wrong. Sarah immediately contacted the Mount Cinder National Park headquarters. The ranger on duty, a kind but weary man named Officer Hayes, listened patiently as Sarah recounted their planned route and the lack of communication. He assured her that a preliminary check would be initiated, but the sheer vastness of the Whispering Peaks sector meant that a full-scale search would require more evidence of distress. However, as the hours ticked by and darkness once again settled over the mountains without any word from the brothers, the alarm was officially raised. The search operation that commenced the following day was massive. Park rangers, seasoned search and rescue teams, and local volunteers from the close-knit community mobilized. Helicopters with powerful spotlights crisscrossed the skies above Mount Cinder, their rotating blades a rhythmic, disturbing throb that echoed through the valleys. On the ground, dozens of experienced outdoorsmen, some who knew every deer trail and every hidden cave, meticulously combed through the designated search grids. They followed the faint paths the brothers were expected to take, explored every ravine, checked every potential campsite, and shouted their names until their voices grew hoarse. Days bled into weeks. The initial fervor of the search gradually gave way to grim determination, then to weary resignation. The wilderness of Mount Cinder seemed to swallow every effort. The dense forests offered no obvious signs. The rushing rivers carried no discarded gear. The rocky outcrops revealed no footprints. It was as if Ethan and Liam had simply vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Their packs, their tent, their camping stove, everything they had carried with them seemed to have been utterly absorbed by the unforgiving landscape. There were no broken branches indicating a fall, no signs of a struggle, no discarded items that might have given a clue. The satellite phone, too, never transmitted a signal, adding to the perplexing silence. After 3 exhaustive weeks with no new leads and diminishing hopes, the search efforts were officially scaled back and eventually halted. The park superintendent held a somber press conference expressing condolences to the Miller family and stating that, despite all efforts, Ethan and Liam were now officially listed as missing, presumed lost in the vast, untamed wilderness of Mount Cinder National Park. For Sarah, the news was a crushing blow, but even as the official search ended, the one in her heart would continue, forever. The mountains had claimed her sons, or so everyone believed, leaving behind a wound that would never truly heal, and a mystery that would haunt the community for decades to come. The relentless ticking of the clock marked not just hours, but years, then decades, since Ethan and Liam vanished into the vast embrace of Mount Cinder, the small, close-knit town that sat nestled at the park's edge, once a bustling hub for hikers and tourists, seemed to hold its breath, forever haunted by the boys' disappearance. The initial shock and widespread search efforts had long faded into memory, replaced by a quiet, pervasive sadness. The story of the Miller brothers became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to restless teenagers contemplating daring adventures in the wilderness. Park rangers who had been part of the original search retired, and new generations of park staff only knew the case from dusty files and somber anecdotes. For Sarah, the passage of time brought no solace, only a deeper, more profound ache. Her hair, once a vibrant brown, had faded to a soft silver, and the lines etched around her eyes were not just from age, but from countless nights spent staring at the stars, wondering where her sons might be. She continued to live in the same small cabin, surrounded by the echoes of their laughter and the silent weight of their absence. Every sunrise brought a fresh wave of quiet hope, only to be met by the crushing reality of another day without answers. She kept their rooms exactly as they had left them, a shrine to a life abruptly interrupted. Their hiking boots remained by the door, their jackets hung on hooks as if awaiting their return. The official investigation, despite its initial intensity, had gone cold within a few years. The police chief at the time had filled out the final reports with a heavy heart, classifying the case as an unsolved disappearance, attributing it to the unpredictable and often perilous nature of the wilderness. Without any physical evidence, no struggle, no accident site, no discarded personal effects, there was nothing to pursue. The file was eventually archived, joining countless other unsolved mysteries in the annals of law enforcement. Experts had theorized about wild animal attacks, falls into hidden ravines, or getting hopelessly lost in uncharted territory. But for Sarah, none of these explanations offered true peace. She instinctively felt there was more to the story, a missing piece that eluded everyone. Her hope, though often a fragile flicker against the overwhelming darkness of grief, never entirely extinguished. It was a silent, unyielding belief that somewhere, somehow the truth would eventually surface from the depths of Mount Cinder's enduring silence. It was the summer of 2018, 23 years after the Miller brothers vanished, and the vast wilderness of Mount Cinder National Park continued to hold its secrets tightly. Ranger Ben Carter, 35 years old, was a man perfectly suited to its demands. Lean, with an observant gaze and a quiet dedication that bordered on reverence for the natural world, Ben had spent the last decade patrolling its most remote corners. He knew the park's official trails by heart, but it was the uncharted territories, the forgotten game paths, and the deepest, most secluded ravines that truly captivated him. He was meticulous, a trait that often led him to discoveries others might overlook. On this particular morning, Ben was on a routine, yet exceptionally challenging, patrol in the Whispering Peaks sector, the very area where Ethan and Liam were last seen. This part of the park was notoriously difficult to traverse. The old-growth forest here was exceptionally dense, the undergrowth thick and tangled, and the terrain unforgivingly steep. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the ancient canopy, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. It was a place where hikers rarely ventured, and even experienced rangers seldom visited more than once or twice a year. Ben moved with practiced ease, his boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen pine needles and decaying leaves, his senses keenly attuned to the sounds and smells of the wild. He had been tracing the faint outline of a deer trail along a steep ridge, making notes on new growth and wildlife signs, when something glinted in the muted light. It was an unnatural flash of metal, partially obscured by a thick clump of moss and damp earth that had accumulated over many seasons. It was tiny, almost insignificant, easily missed by anyone less observant, or perhaps by someone whose mind was not quietly cataloging every deviation from the natural order. Ben paused, his experienced eye immediately recognizing the incongruity. Human debris was unfortunately common in some parts of the park, but in this isolated, rarely disturbed area, any foreign object was highly unusual. He knelt down, carefully pushing aside the damp moss and the layers of decomposing leaves. What he uncovered sent a jolt through him. It was an old, weathered instant camera, its plastic casing faded and scratched, its lens cloudy with age. It looked like something from a forgotten era, an artifact from decades past. The sheer improbability of finding such an item in this untouched wilderness was astounding. It wasn't the kind of disposable item a casual hiker would carry and abandon. It spoke of a more significant, more permanent presence. Ben picked it up, his gloved fingers tracing the worn edges. The camera was heavy, solid, and though clearly damaged by years of exposure, it felt strangely intact, as if it had simply been waiting to be found. A quiet sense of foreboding, mingled with a professional thrill, settled over him. He knew, with an instinct born of years in the wild, that he had stumbled upon something profoundly important. Something that might finally speak volumes in Mount Cinder's enduring silence. He carefully packed the camera, noting the precise GPS coordinates of its resting place, already feeling the weight of the long cold case pressing upon him. The journey back to the Mount Cinder National Park headquarters was a blur for Ranger Ben Carter. The old instant camera, carefully wrapped and secured in his pack, felt heavy, not just with its physical weight, but with the potential revelations it might hold. He drove with a renewed sense of purpose, the years of routine patrols now infused with the thrilling yet daunting prospect of finally shedding light on a mystery that had long cast a shadow over the park and its surrounding community. Upon his arrival, Ben headed straight to the small, cluttered office dedicated to cold cases and historical records. He unwrapped the camera, placing it gently on a worn desk beside a stack of dusty files. The camera itself was a relic from a bygone era, its plastic casing faded by sun and moisture, the once vibrant colors muted to a dull pastel. The lens was cloudy, and a fine layer of grime clung to its crevices, testament to its long exposure to the elements. He turned it over, examining it closely. There were no obvious identifying marks, no serial numbers visible on the exterior that hadn't been obliterated by time. Ben remembered the case files he had briefly glanced at during his orientation to Mount Cinder years ago, the tragic story of the Miller brothers, lost without a trace. The name Liam on the camera's casing, though faint, had been the initial spark. He pulled out the thick, meticulously organized file on the Miller disappearance. It contained dozens of typed reports, faded photographs of the young men, and meticulous maps of the failed search efforts from 1995. He flipped through the pages, searching for any detail about the boys' personal belongings. He found it on a faded inventory list of items the brothers were known to have carried. 1. Instant camera, dark blue, gifted to Liam Miller, with custom engraving. The word custom immediately caught his attention. He squinted at the camera again, running his finger along the side where the plastic met the metal frame. There, almost imperceptibly, he felt a slight irregularity, a faint, raised outline beneath the accumulated dirt. With a small, soft brush and careful precision, Ben began to clean away the grime. Slowly, painstakingly, a tiny, intricate engraving began to emerge. It was a stylized rendering of Mount Cinder's iconic twin peaks, a design unique to local artisan gifts, and beneath it, etched in a flowing script, were the letters LM. It was unequivocally Liam Miller's camera. A profound sense of awe and responsibility washed over Ben. This wasn't just another piece of old trash found in the woods. This was a direct, tangible link to a disappearance that had baffled everyone for more than 2 decades. It was the first solid piece of evidence found since the initial, fruitless search. The location of the find was also deeply significant, a remote, almost forgotten corner of the Whispering Peaks, far from any established trail, precisely where the brothers were believed to have ventured, but where no trace of them had ever been found. Ben knew that the camera itself, even without film, was a powerful message from the past. Its very presence spoke volumes, shattering the long-held assumption that the brothers had simply been swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. It suggested they had gone deeper, perhaps stumbled upon something, or met with something that led to their permanent disappearance. The implications sent a shiver down his spine. The cold case of Ethan and Liam Miller had just inexplicably warmed, and Ben Carter, the diligent park ranger, now found himself standing on the precipice of a mystery far deeper and more complex than he could have ever imagined. His quiet, professional curiosity was now ignited into a burning resolve. This was no longer just a cold case file. It was a living enigma. The drive to Sarah Miller's small, secluded cabin was a quiet one for Ranger Ben Carter. The weight of the old camera, now carefully placed on the passenger seat, felt almost alive with the dormant energy of a quarter-century-old mystery. He knew this visit would be difficult, that unearthing such a long-buried sorrow might cause more pain than comfort. Yet, the possibility of providing answers, however painful, propelled him forward. Sarah, now in her late 80s, her movements slow but her mind still sharp, answered the door. Her face, a roadmap of a life lived with quiet grief, showed a flicker of surprise at seeing a park ranger on her doorstep, especially one she didn't immediately recognize. Ben introduced himself, his voice gentle, and explained the reason for his visit. He carefully pulled out the camera, holding it out to her. Her eyes, once so full of a mother's joy and later dimmed by endless waiting, widened in disbelief as they fixated on the object in his hand. For a long moment, she simply stared, her breath catching in her throat. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached out and took it. Her gnarled fingers traced the faded plastic, brushing over the barely visible LM engraving. A soft gasp escaped her lips, and her eyes, clouded with unshed tears, suddenly shone with a fierce, almost youthful light. "Liam," she whispered, her voice a thin, fragile thread. "This is Liam's camera. I gave it to him for his 18th birthday." Memories, sharp and vivid, flooded her mind. She remembered wrapping the gift, Liam's excited grin, his promise to fill it with pictures of their adventures. For 23 years, that promise had been an empty echo, a cruel reminder of what was lost. Now, the camera, cold and tangible in her hand, was a physical manifestation of that lost past, and simultaneously, a startling beacon of hope. The initial shock gave way to a torrent of emotions, overwhelming grief for the years of silence, but also an undeniable surge of hope that dared to challenge the long-accepted narrative of their disappearance. She invited Ben inside, leading him to the worn armchair in her living room. With the camera clutched to her chest, she began to speak, her voice gaining strength as she recounted the story of that fateful August in 1995. She spoke of Ethan's adventurous spirit, Liam's quiet curiosity, and their shared excitement for the Whispering Peaks expedition. She described her initial unease, her fatherly instincts, and the agonizing weeks of the fruitless search. As she spoke, she inadvertently revealed a small detail, one that had been overlooked or dismissed in the chaos of the initial investigation. Liam had been particularly excited about finding a rare native orchid species rumored to grow only in a specific, hidden gorge deep within the remote sector. He said it was his secret project, Sarah recalled, a faint smile touching her lips before fading into sadness. He always wanted to capture its beauty on his camera. She finished her story, her gaze fixed on Ben, her eyes pleading. "I waited 23 years to know what happened to my sons. If the mountain has finally decided to speak, I will be there to hear it. Please," she implored, her voice breaking. "Find out what this means. Find my boys. Please, Ranger Carter, don't let this be another unanswered question." Her plea, raw with decades of unresolved grief and a newly rekindled hope, settled heavily in the quiet room, an undeniable call to action for the dedicated ranger. The conversation with Sarah Miller had profoundly affected Ranger Ben Carter. Her raw grief, decades old, yet as fresh as the day her sons vanished, coupled with the undeniable presence of Liam's camera, had ignited a spark within him that no official cold case file ever could. He knew instinctively that this was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a deeply personal quest for truth. Officially, the investigation remained closed, but Ben was now operating on his own time, fueled by a powerful blend of professional curiosity and a deep empathy for Sarah's enduring pain. This would be his unofficial investigation. His first step was to immerse himself in the voluminous archives of Mount Cinder National Park. He spent countless hours in the dusty, temperature-controlled room, surrounded by rows of ancient filing cabinets and shelves overflowing with meticulously organized, yet largely forgotten, documents. He pulled the thick folder labeled Miller, Ethan, and Liam, 1995 disappearance, and began to pore over every single page. He reread the original ranger reports, the desperate pleas from Sarah, the detailed logs of the search and rescue efforts, and the final somber reports concluding the active investigation. He cross-referenced names, dates, and locations, searching for any inconsistency, any detail that might have been overlooked in the frantic initial days. He studied old topographical maps of the Whispering Peaks, comparing them to more recent surveys, looking for changes in terrain or any new features that might have emerged or been discovered since '95. He also delved into less formal sources. Ben tracked down retired park rangers who had been part of the original search party, now living quiet lives in distant towns. He called them, explaining his renewed interest, listening patiently as they recounted their memories, tinged with a mix of frustration and enduring sadness. Most offered little new information, reiterating the vastness of the park and the thoroughness of their efforts. However, one old-timer, a gruff but kind man named Gus Peterson, who had served as a park patrolman for 40 years, mentioned a peculiar detail. "There was talk," Gus drawled, his voice raspy with age, "about some unusual activity in that deep valley around that time. Helicopters, not park ones, flying in and out at odd hours. We just put it down to some military exercise. Cold War stuff. But it was strange, way off the usual flight paths." Gus dismissed it as mere speculation, but the detail lodged itself in Ben's mind. Ben also visited the local public library, poring over microfilmed newspapers from 1995. While most articles focused on the disappearance and the search, he found a few cryptic mentions of increased military presence in the broader region, vague references to security measures and classified operations. These mentions were always brief, tucked away in small columns, overshadowed by bigger news, and never explicitly linked to Mount Cinder or the missing brothers. Yet, when combined with Gus's anecdote, they began to paint a faint, unsettling picture. He even interviewed longtime residents of the small town, people who remembered the Miller family well. Most shared stories of the boys' adventurous nature and the family's grief. One elderly woman, a herbalist who lived on the outskirts of town and was known for her acute observations, recalled a period in the mid-90s when a specific remote part of the park seemed unusually quiet, even for the wilderness. "The animals, they just weren't there," she'd murmured, her eyes distant. "And the air, sometimes it had a funny smell, like metal, but not." She, too, had dismissed it as her imagination, or the strange ways of the mountain. Slowly, meticulously, Ben began to piece together these scattered fragments. The official reports stated no unusual activity, no external factors. But the anecdotes, the faint mentions in old newspapers, and the strange observations by locals suggested a different reality, one where the wilderness might not have been as empty and untouched as everyone believed. He felt a growing certainty that the key to unlocking the fate of Ethan and Liam lay not in the natural dangers of the park, but in something far more clandestine, something deliberately concealed within its vast, silent expanse. He pulled out the most detailed, earliest Park Survey maps, intending to cross-reference every piece of anecdotal evidence with the geographical layout, hoping to pinpoint an area that might explain the inconsistencies. Days bled into nights as Ranger Ben Carter remained hunched over his desk, the small office bathed in the glow of a single lamp. The official park archives had yielded little more than what was already known, but Ben's unofficial research had unearthed a fascinating, if unsettling, tapestry of whispers and inconsistencies. He had compiled a growing collection of old newspaper clippings, transcribed interviews with retired personnel, and digitized decades-old weather patterns. Each piece on its own seemed insignificant, but together they began to form a mosaic of something far more complex than a simple hiking tragedy. His most promising lead, however, came from an unexpected source, a collection of declassified Park Survey maps from the early 1990s. These were not the usual recreational maps issued to visitors, nor the standard topographical charts used for official park management. These were highly detailed geological and environmental surveys, commissioned for specific, often obscure research projects that had long since been completed or abandoned. They were brittle, their creases yellowed with age, and their legends dense with scientific notations. Ben had found them tucked away in a dusty, unmarked box in a rarely accessed sub-archive, almost as if they were never meant to be seen again. He spread one such map, dated 1993, across his desk, its vast expanse depicting the remote Whispering Peaks sector. He traced the contours of the land with a magnifying glass, cross-referencing the coordinates of Liam's camera, the rumored location of Liam's secret orchid gorge, and the areas where Gus Peterson had recalled unusual helicopter activity. Most of the map depicted the expected natural features: dense forest, meandering rivers, rocky outcrops, and steep inclines. But then, his eye snagged on something utterly out of place. Deep within the most rugged and inaccessible part of the Whispering Peaks, precisely within the general vicinity where the camera was found, was a peculiar, almost perfectly geometric shape. It was a small, circular area, about 1/4 mile in diameter, marked with a faint, dashed line. Inside the circle, scrawled in an unfamiliar hand, were 2 letters: Site Z. Ben stared at the anomaly. There was no legend, no accompanying key, no official explanation for Site Z anywhere on the map or in any park document he had ever encountered. It didn't correspond to any known natural formation, any ranger outpost, any historic landmark, or even any former logging operation. It was a man-made imprint on a map of pristine wilderness, an unnatural scar on the face of Mount Cinder. The precise, almost sterile geometry of the circle clashed jarringly with the organic chaos of the surrounding topography. He checked other maps from the same period, but Site Z appeared on none of them. It was unique to this one, obscure survey. A chilling realization began to dawn on him. This wasn't a natural feature. It had to be a hidden installation, a clandestine operation deliberately concealed within the vastness of the park, and it was located exactly where Ethan and Liam would have been. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, began to snap into place with a terrifying precision. The unusual helicopter activity Gus recalled, the odd quietness the herbalist described, Liam's camera found near this very spot, it all pointed to this one, mysterious Site Z. His curiosity, already burning, now flared into an unyielding determination. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that the disappearance of the Miller brothers was not simply a tragic accident of the wilderness. It was something far more sinister, something inextricably linked to this hidden anomaly. The official cold case file had been dead for decades, but Site Z pulsed with unspoken truths. Ben meticulously marked the coordinates on his modern GPS device. He understood the immense risk involved in venturing into such a place, especially one that had clearly been erased from most records. But the thought of Sarah Miller and the brothers who had simply vanished left him with no other choice. The answers, he felt, lay buried within that enigmatic circle. He would go there himself and finally bring Mount Cinder's deepest secret to light. The trek to Site Z was even more arduous than Ranger Ben Carter had anticipated. The coordinates from the old, declassified map led him into a part of Mount Cinder National Park that truly seemed untouched by human presence. The trails, if they could even be called that, were faint animal tracks, often disappearing entirely into dense thickets of thorn bushes and ancient gnarled roots. The terrain was relentlessly steep, forcing him to scramble over massive fallen logs and navigate treacherous rock falls. The canopy overhead was so thick that sunlight rarely pierced through, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual damp twilight, adding to the eerie isolation. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of his boots and the distant rush of an unseen river. This was wilderness in its most raw and unforgiving form, a natural fortress guarding its secrets. He pushed forward for 2 days, fueled by meager rations and an unshakable resolve. His intuition, honed by years in the wild, told him he was close. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, as he navigated a particularly dense section of old-growth forest, he noticed it. Not a structure, but an anomaly within the natural chaos. The trees here seemed to grow too evenly, forming an unnatural corridor, and the ground underfoot felt strangely solid, almost unnaturally level despite the surrounding ruggedness. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. What first appeared to be a massive rock face, deeply covered in moss and lichen, gradually revealed itself to be a masterfully camouflaged concrete structure. It blended seamlessly with the natural environment, its surfaces meticulously covered with earth, strategically placed boulders, and even mature trees that seemed to sprout directly from its facade. There were no obvious doors, no windows, no visible signs of an entrance. It was a ghost, a phantom of human construction swallowed by the wilderness. Ben circled the perimeter, his fingers tracing the cold, rough surface of the concrete, feeling the deception of its disguise. It was a monument to secrecy. He searched for hours, meticulously examining every inch of the structure, his mind racing through possibilities. There had to be an entry point. Finally, at the base of what looked like a natural rock outcropping, almost completely hidden by a cascading curtain of ivy and a fallen, moss-covered log, he found it. A narrow, almost unnoticeable seam in the concrete, barely wide enough to slide his hand into. It appeared to be a cleverly disguised service entrance or a ventilation shaft, crudely sealed but now showing signs of partial collapse, perhaps from seismic activity or simply decades of neglect. Ben carefully pulled away the decaying log and ripped through the thick ivy, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The air that wafted out was cold, stale, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, almost sterile, like forgotten machinery. He hesitated for a moment, flashlight in hand. This was a point of no return, a step into the unknown that could hold immense danger. But the image of Sarah Miller's hopeful yet grieving face spurred him onward. He took a deep breath, adjusted his headlamp and squeezed through the tight opening, inching his way into the impenetrable darkness. The passage was cramped and uncomfortable, rough-hewn and smelling of damp concrete, but it gradually widened, leading him into a surprisingly spacious tunnel. The tunnel was lined with thick, reinforced concrete walls, a stark contrast to the natural rock above. He walked further, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The temperature dropped noticeably with every step, and the air grew heavier, thick with the weight of decades of undisturbed stillness. After several minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber, carved deep within the mountain. It was an abandoned underground facility, stretching further than his flashlight beam could reach, its purpose shrouded in mystery, a testament to a forgotten and deeply hidden past. This was Site Z. The vast chamber stretched out before Ranger Ben Carter, a silent testament to a long-forgotten clandestine operation. His headlamp cut a path through the oppressive darkness, revealing rows of outdated, hulking machinery, massive consoles with countless dials and blinking lights that had long since faded, and overturned chairs. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust, damp concrete, and a faint metallic odor that hinted at chemical processes. It was clear that this facility had been abandoned in a hurry. Scattered papers, empty coffee mugs, and forgotten tools littered the floor, as if its occupants had simply vanished. This was Site Z, a place meticulously hidden from the world, now laid bare in its desolate stillness. Ben moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing eerily in the cavernous space. He passed through what appeared to be laboratories, distinguished by intricate wiring snaking across the floor and large, empty containment units. He then entered a section of smaller rooms, which seemed to be living quarters. Here, the signs of hurried departure were even more pronounced. Rumpled blankets on cots, a discarded uniform jacket, a half-eaten, petrified meal on a small table. He felt an unsettling chill, a sense of human lives abruptly interrupted. In one of these cramped bunk rooms, tucked away beneath a rusted metal cot and partially obscured by a pile of mildewed scientific journals, Ben's light fell upon something that made his heart leap. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover water-damaged and its pages warped, but unmistakably a personal diary. He reached for it, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation. The moment he picked it up, he saw the faint, familiar etching on the inside cover, a stylized rendering of Mount Cinder's twin peaks, and beneath it, the distinct flowing script, Liam Miller. He found a relatively dry spot on the floor and, with careful precision, began to turn the brittle pages. The ink had blurred in places, but the handwriting was unmistakably Liam's, neat and concise. The entries began innocently enough, detailing their hike into the whispering peaks, the breathtaking scenery, the camaraderie with Ethan. But then, the tone shifted abruptly. August 17th, 1995. We found something incredible today. Not a fire tower, but something completely unexpected. Ethan stumbled upon it first, a massive steel hatch, almost completely hidden beneath moss and rock in that deep gorge we were exploring. It looked ancient, almost like a relic from the Cold War. We couldn't resist. Curiosity, you know? We managed to pry it open. Inside, a dark tunnel led straight down. We went in. It was cold and the air smelled strange, like a mix of metal and something chemical. After about 20 minutes, it opened up into this huge underground complex. It's not just a bunker, it's like a lab or some kind of secret facility. And there were people here. They found us. We tried to run, but they were too fast. They said we had stumbled onto a classified operation and couldn't leave. They promised we would be debriefed and then released. But I don't trust them. Ethan doesn't either. August 21st, 1995. They haven't released us. They give us food, but we're prisoners. They make us perform strange tasks. Not physical labor, but observational duties. There are scientists here dressed in strange hazmat suits. They talk about containment zones, energy anomalies, and field tests. We've tried to ask what this place is, what they're doing, but they just give vague answers. They say it's for our safety. Ethan is trying to figure out a way out. He thinks there's a weak point in their routine. August 25th, 1995. Ethan tried to escape today. We had a plan. He was going to create a diversion, break some of their equipment, cause a distraction while I tried to slip past the guards. He did it. I heard the alarms, shouts. I heard them running after him. I saw him, just for a moment, disappear around a corner. Guards right on his heels. I tried to make a break for the main exit, but I was spotted. I heard shouts, and then I heard gunshots, multiple shots. I don't know what happened to Ethan. They grabbed me. They are furious. They said I'm being transferred to a different facility where I won't be able to cause any more trouble. I don't know where they're taking me. They took my camera. This is it. If anyone ever finds this journal, please tell Mom we loved her. Tell her we tried. The journal ended there, abruptly, the last few lines scrawled unevenly, as if written in haste, under immense duress. Ben felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. Gunshots. The implication was clear. Ethan, Liam's brother, had likely been killed trying to escape, fighting for their freedom. And Liam himself had been taken, transferred to another secret location. All these years, the park and the entire community had believed they were lost to the wilderness, victims of a tragic accident. But the truth, revealed in these few desperate pages, was far more chilling. They were victims of a secret operation, a hidden truth buried deep within Mount Cinder. Ben clutched the journal, its pages a direct link to a past that had just become terrifyingly, irrevocably present. He had to get back to Sarah. He had to tell her what he had found, no matter how devastating the news. The journey back from Mount Cinder to Sarah Miller's quiet cabin was perhaps the longest ranger Ben Carter had ever made. The worn leather journal, now carefully secured in a waterproof bag, felt like a lead weight, heavy with the devastating truth it contained. He knew this moment would be agonizing, that the fragile hope he had inadvertently rekindled in Sarah would now be shattered, replaced by an even deeper, more profound sorrow. Yet, the truth, however brutal, was a necessary step towards closure. Sarah met him at the door, her eyes, though 88 years old, still keen with anticipation. She saw the solemnity on Ben's face, the slight tremor in his hands as he presented the journal. Her expression shifted from hopeful expectation to a dawning, terrible understanding. She took the journal, her gnarled fingers tracing the faint, familiar name Liam Miller on the cover. Ben sat across from her, offering a silent presence as she began to read. She started slowly, her lips moving almost imperceptibly with each word. Her eyes, once sharp, now squinted against the faded ink, struggling to make out the cramped handwriting. She read of the accident, of their capture, of the strange experiments and the suffocating secrecy of the hidden facility. As she turned pages, her breath grew shallow, her face progressively paler. Her hand, clutching the journal, began to tremble violently when she reached the entry detailing Ethan's desperate, valiant attempt at escape. The words, "I heard gunshots," multiple shots, hung in the air, a chilling echo in the quiet room. A low, guttural sob escaped her lips, a sound of raw, primal grief that tore at Ben's heart. The journal slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor, its pages splayed open, revealing the tragic end of Ethan's story. The tears came then, not gentle droplets, but a torrent of long-suppressed anguish, the accumulated pain of 23 years of agonizing uncertainty finally finding its release. Her body shook with convulsive sobs, each one a testament to the son she now knew was lost to her, not to the mountain's indifference, but to a cold, calculated, human act. Her vibrant, audacious Ethan silenced by a bullet in a desperate bid for freedom. The image, conjured by Liam's words, was unbearable. Ben knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder, offering what little solace he could in the face of such profound sorrow. He remained silent, allowing her the space to mourn, to confront the bitter, unvarnished truth. The air in the small cabin was thick with her despair, a palpable weight. Slowly, gradually, her sobs subsided, leaving her exhausted, but with a renewed, grim clarity in her eyes. She reached down, her hand still shaking, and picked up the journal once more. She turned to the very last page, where Ben had shown her the faint, almost indiscernible marks. "And Liam," she whispered, her voice raw, but steadied by a new determination. "He was transferred to a different facility." She pointed to a series of numbers and fragmented words, barely scratched into the worn leather, almost as an afterthought, a last desperate act of communication. This must be where they took him. He's alive. I feel it." The fragile hope, almost extinguished by Ethan's fate, now flickered to life, tenacious and defiant. The journal, while confirming one tragedy, had simultaneously unveiled a new path, a final thread connecting them to Liam. It was a complex, devastating truth, but within its depths lay the unexpected, slender chance that one of her sons might still be out there waiting to be found. The story of the Miller brothers was far from over. The days and weeks following the discovery of Liam's journal were consumed by a singular, all-encompassing mission for Ranger Ben Carter and Sarah Miller to decipher the cryptic message hidden within its final pages. The devastating confirmation of Ethan's probable death had left an indelible wound, but Liam's faint scrawl, a desperate attempt to communicate his fate, ignited a new, fiercely burning hope. For Sarah, this wasn't merely an intellectual puzzle. It was a lifeline, a final connection to her remaining son. Ben spent countless hours hunched over the water-damaged journal, his magnifying glass tracing the irregular lines and seemingly random numbers that Liam had etched. He cross-referenced them with old military ciphers, public codes, and even common historical encryption methods, but nothing yielded a coherent pattern. The symbols seemed arbitrary, nonsensical. Sarah, meanwhile, endlessly reread the entries, searching for any subtle clue, any forgotten detail from Liam's youth that might shed light on his final, desperate message. Her mind, though frail from age, held a vast reservoir of memories from her son's childhood, moments of play and secret languages. One evening, as Ben slumped over the desk in his cabin, exhausted and frustrated, Sarah's voice, surprisingly strong, cut through the silence. "He used to do this," she said, pointing to a series of seemingly unrelated numbers near the coded message. When he and Ethan were little, they had a secret code for their treehouse adventures. It wasn't a standard cipher. It was based on a sequence of numbers, like a map. Each number represented a word or sometimes a direction, dictated by the pattern of their favorite constellations on a given night. Ben, intrigued, asked her to elaborate. She described how Liam, ever the more scientific and logical of the two, had developed a system using specific star patterns visible from their old treehouse as numerical keys. This was a long shot, a childhood game. But it was the only unique lead they had. Ben, a meticulous researcher, immediately pivoted. He acquired star charts from 1995, specifically for the night of August 25th, the date of Liam's last entry. He painstakingly overlaid them with the numbers Sarah remembered from their childhood game, and then, using the context of Liam's final words in the journal, began to apply the logic of the constellation pattern. It was a painstaking, almost impossible task, but slowly, miraculously, a faint image began to emerge. The arbitrary numbers transformed into a series of highly unconventional coordinates, not typical latitude and longitude, but a complex set of directional bearings and distances pointing towards a location far, far away from Mount Cinder. It indicated a region deep within the remote, unforgiving expanse of the Alaskan wilderness, a place of permafrost, towering peaks, and vast empty tundra. The revelation was met with a mix of awe and skepticism from the few park officials Ben consulted. The idea that a secret facility, potentially linked to a Cold War-era program, could exist in such a remote, inaccessible part of Alaska, and that Liam Miller could have been transferred there, seemed utterly fantastical. Some suggested it was a cruel trick of a traumatized mind, or a coincidence. But for Ben, and especially for Sarah, it was the answer they had so desperately sought. Liam was alive, at least when he wrote that final message, and he had given them a direction. Sarah, though frail, declared her unwavering resolve to follow this new lead. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of decades of unyielding hope. Ben, deeply committed to her quest, knew he couldn't abandon her now. The emotional cost would be too great, and his own sense of justice demanded he see this through. He began to reach out to his network of contacts, a few trusted colleagues in various park services, former military personnel he had met through his ranger work, and even independent researchers known for their expertise in remote expeditions. He explained the incredible, improbable story, presented Liam's journal, and the newly deciphered clues. Against all odds, a small dedicated team began to form. They were a diverse group, a seasoned bush pilot, an expert in cold weather survival, and a former military intelligence analyst with an interest in obscure declassified projects. They understood the immense dangers and the slim chances of success, but the sheer improbability and human tragedy of the Miller brothers' story had captured their imaginations. As the last lingering days of autumn faded from Mount Cinder, giving way to the crisp winds of winter, Ben Carter and his newly assembled team made their final preparations. Their journey would take them thousands of miles north, into the frozen, silent heart of the Alaskan wilderness. They did not know what secrets awaited them there, or what fate had truly befallen Liam Miller. But they had a direction, a burning resolve, and a desperate hope that this final, impossible chapter of the Miller brothers' story would finally be written.